The snow was slowly falling to the ground, wrapping Whitehorse in a white blanket. The Northern Lights Hotel glittered with holiday lights like a beacon in the darkness of a winter evening. Today, Everhill Investments was holding its annual Christmas corporate party, the most anticipated event of the year, when strict suits and office hierarchy gave way to cocktail dresses and informal socializing. Louis Freeman adjusted his tie, looking in the elevator mirror. In his 31 years, he already held the position of senior financial analyst. His dark skin contrasted with the white collar of his shirt, and his eyes showed a tiredness he tried hard to hide. Corporations were never his thing, but to refuse to attend was to invite unnecessary questions. The elevator doors opened, releasing Luis into a world of festive bustle. The hotel's main banquet hall had been transformed beyond recognition. Garlands adorned the ceiling beams, a tall fir tree stood in the corner, and the tables were bursting with gourmet food. The sounds of jazz flowed softly through the room, mingling with the hum of voices and the clinking of glasses. Luis noticed Melina at once. His wife always knew how to attract attention. Today she wore a tight red dress that emphasized every curve of her body. She stood surrounded by her colleagues, laughing at someone's joke, a glass of champagne in her hand. The 24-year-old beauty from the marketing department who had somehow miraculously agreed to be his wife 2 years ago. "Louis, you're finally here." Douglas Pierce, his closest friend and colleague, approached with 2 glasses of whiskey. "You're almost an hour late." "Sorry, I was late with the annual report." Louis accepted the glass, taking a small sip. "How's it going in here?" "The usual. The boss has already made 3 toasts. Johnson from accounting is drunk and telling everyone about his stamp collection, and your wife." Douglas was silent for a moment. Douglas stopped, nodding meaningfully toward Melina. Louis followed his gaze. Melina was now talking to the new project manager, leaning too close and resting her palm on his shoulder, a standard scene for the last few months of their marriage. "She's just outgoing," Louis said, the phrase that had become his mantra. Douglas just shook his head. "Sure, buddy, no matter what you say." From across the room, Catherine Morris, Melina's best friend and human resources specialist, was watching. She saw how Louis tensed up when he noticed his wife's flirtation. She saw how Melina, feeling her husband's gaze on her, only laughed harder, tilting her head. She saw the subtle nuances of the game her friend had been playing for months. "They're such a beautiful couple," said a colleague standing next to her. "I've always envied their relationship." Catherine smiled, but did not answer anything. The trappings of a perfect marriage, joint appearances at corporate events, expensive birthday gifts, photos of the happy couple on social networks, had long ago turned into a facade, behind which there was an emptiness. The evening was slowly gaining momentum. Louis kept to himself, chatting mostly with Douglas and a few other colleagues from the finance department. Melina, on the other hand, seemed eager to talk to everyone present. Periodically, their gazes crossed across the room, and each time Louis was the first to avert his eyes. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, a celebratory dinner was announced. The tables were arranged in a U-shape, and Louis found himself at the far end, next to Douglas and the elderly head of the analytical department. Melina sat almost at the very entrance, surrounded by her younger colleagues. The physical distance between the couple seemed symbolic. "Are you all right?" Douglas asked quietly when dessert was served. "Yes, I'm just tired," Louis replied, though his gaze said otherwise. After dinner, the dancing began. Louis apologized to his colleagues and went out into the hallway for a breath of fresh air. The music and laughter pressed in on him, making him feel as if the walls were shrinking. He walked past the front desk to the large panoramic window, behind which the snow continued to fall. It was then that he heard Melina's voice coming from the small guest lounge. She spoke softly, but in the empty hallway, every word was distinct. "He suspects nothing," Melina said. "Louis is too absorbed in his charts and reports to notice anything around him." "It's dangerous, Mal," replied a woman's voice that Louis recognized immediately. "Catherine, you're playing with fire. I know what I'm doing. It's over between us. I'm just waiting for the right moment." "What about your diagnosis? Are you going to tell him?" There was a pause. Louis froze, afraid to move. "What diagnosis?" "No," Melina said at last. It would only complicate things. Besides, I'm not sure I infected him. We haven't been together much in the last few months. But he has a right to know! Catherine's voice sounded indignant. Enough of this, Melina cut her off abruptly. I've already decided. I'm meeting Jay tomorrow. He promised to find me an apartment. Jay? Catherine asked. The Jay you met at the conference in Vancouver? I thought it was just a one-night stand. Melina's laugh sounded cold and calculating. Oh, it's long since grown into something more. Louis is a good man, but he's so boring. Jay understands me. He makes me feel alive. Luis felt the ground go from under his feet. All the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Melina's aloofness, her frequent business trips, the strange phone calls in the middle of the night. But what was the diagnosis? What was she hiding? He should have turned around and walked away, given himself time to process what he'd heard. Instead, Louis stepped into the hallway. Melina and Catherine were sitting on a small sofa against the wall, leaning against each other. When she saw her husband, Melina flinched but quickly pulled herself together. Louis, we were just talking about you. Her smile never touched her eyes. I heard, he said quietly. Heard enough. Catherine rose from the couch, nervously adjusting her dress. I think I'll go back to the party, she muttered, avoiding Louis's gaze. When they were alone, Melina stood up slowly, squaring her shoulders. It's not good to eavesdrop, dear. What diagnosis were you talking about? Louis ignored her words. What are you hiding from me? Melina turned away, staring out the window at the falling snow. Not here, she finally said. Let's go to the conference room on the 3rd floor. There's no one there. They walked silently up the stairs, avoiding the elevator where they might meet other guests. The conference room greeted them with coolness and darkness. Melina flicked a switch, and the room was illuminated by the dim light of the wall lamps. So? Louis crossed his arms over his chest, feeling the anger building up inside. Melina walked around the long table, keeping her distance from her husband. I didn't want you to find out this way, she began. I had planned it differently. Recognized what? His voice shook. About your affair with some Jay? Or the mysterious diagnosis you didn't think you needed to tell me about? Both. She looked up at him, her eyes full of challenge. I'm not happy with you, Louis. I have been for a long time. We live as neighbors, not as husband and wife. And that's why you've decided to change? He took a step forward. Instead of talking, solving problems? Solve? She grinned bitterly. What's there to solve? You live your job, you come home to sleep and leave again. When was the last time we had a real conversation? Or made love? Louis opened his mouth to object, but couldn't find the words. She was right. Their marriage had long since become a formality. I was going to file for divorce after New Year's Eve, she continued, seeing his confusion. I wanted to do it in a civilized manner. And the diagnosis? Louis insisted. What was the diagnosis you were talking to Catherine about? Melina turned away, and something changed in her posture. Her shoulders slumped, her arrogance disappeared. I was diagnosed with HIV 3 months ago, she said so quietly that Louis barely heard her. It was as if time had stopped. A void rang in Louis's head. HIV, he repeated mechanically. And you didn't say anything the whole time? I didn't know how to say it. Her voice shook. First there was shock, then denial. I thought it was a mistake. Who did you catch it from? Louis asked, even though he already knew the answer. Most likely from Jay. Melina met his gaze. We haven't always been careful. Louis felt something break inside. The last 2 years of their marriage, all the promises, the plans for the future, everything had turned out to be a lie. And me? His voice sounded unnaturally calm. You put me at risk, too. We've barely slept together in the last 6 months, she countered. And on those rare occasions, you knew, he interrupted her. You knew, Louis interrupted her, feeling the calm change to rage. You knew about your diagnosis, and you still... He couldn't finish the sentence. I used protection, Melina exclaimed. I didn't want to infect you. But there was a risk, Louis shouted, pounding his fist on the table. You were playing with my life, Melina. I was going to tell. Tears streamed down her face. I swear, I wanted to explain everything when I was ready. Louis looked at the woman in front of him and didn't recognize her. Where was the smiling girl he had fallen in love with? The one with whom he had made plans for the future, dreamed of children. "I need to get checked out," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Immediately. "You don't understand." Melina took a step toward him. "I was afraid of your reaction. I was afraid you'd hate me." "How am I supposed to react?" Louis asked bitterly. "Thank you for ruining my life?" Melina's face suddenly changed, her expression hard. "Don't be dramatic," she said coldly. "It's not a death sentence now. With medication, you can live a long and fulfilling life." Her tone, her complete lack of remorse, was the last straw. Louis took 2 quick steps and was beside her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Do you realize what you've done?" His fingers dug into her skin. "You've ruined everything. Let me go." Melina tried to break free. "You're hurting me." But it was as if Louis didn't hear. His eyes were blurred red, his ears were noisy. He shook Melina, causing her head to topple back. "How could you?" he repeated over and over. "How could you do that?" "Louis, stop it!" she screamed, trying to push him away. "You're out of your mind!" For a moment he realized what he was doing and unclenched his fingers. Melina recoiled, breathing heavily, her eyes widening with fear. "Get out," Louis whispered, backing away. "Just go away. I don't want to see you." Melina rubbed her shoulders where his fingerprints had left marks, her face contorted with anger. "You know what?" She spat it out. "I'm glad it's out in the open. Now I don't have to pretend. You've always been a weakling, Louis, always afraid to really live, and I want to live no matter what." She turned around and headed for the door, but halfway out she turned back. "And yes, I hope you're infected too. Then we'll be even." Those words hit harder than any physical blow. Louis froze, shocked by the cruelty in every word. When the door closed behind Melina, he sank into the nearest chair, wrapping his arms around his head. Time ceased to exist. He didn't know how long he sat like that, minutes or hours. Only one thought pulsed in his head. What now? Finally, gathering the last of his strength, Louis stood up. He needed to get back to the party, save face, and tomorrow he would take the tests and decide what to do next. Leaving the conference room, he headed for the elevator. His hands trembled as he pressed the first floor button. The reflection in the mirrored surface showed a man he barely recognized, pale, with a frozen stare and drops of sweat on his forehead. In the banquet hall, the party was in full swing. No one seemed to notice his absence. Louis nodded automatically at his acquaintances, but avoided conversation, keeping to the wall. He looked for Melina, but couldn't find her anywhere. "Hey, you okay?" Douglas appeared beside him, holding out a glass of water. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Louis lied. "Just a headache. Have you seen Melina?" Douglas shook his head. "Not in the last half hour. Maybe in the ladies' room." Suddenly there was shouting from the service entrance. The music stopped abruptly, and the room was silent. One of the hotel employees ran out into the hall, his face contorted with horror. "Call an ambulance!" he shouted. "And the police! There's a woman in there. I think she's dead." Panic gripped the guests. Some rushed to the service entrance. Others pulled out their phones, dialing emergency services. Louis stood there, unable to move, feeling a terrible certainty building up inside. He moved slowly through the crowd toward the service entrance, pushing people out of the way. Beyond the door was a narrow corridor leading to the storage rooms. A small group of people were gathered at the very end of it, bent over something on the floor. Louis squeezed through them and froze. On the floor, in an unnatural pose, lay Melina. Her red dress seemed even brighter against the gray linoleum. Her eyes were wide open but saw nothing. Blue finger marks were visible on her neck. Someone was screaming, someone was crying. Louis heard these sounds as if through a column of water. He looked at his wife's body and felt nothing. No grief, no fear, just a deafening emptiness. It was no more than 15 minutes, though it seemed like an eternity to Louis, when the first police officers arrived. They quickly cordoned off the scene, pushing the curious back into the banquet hall. An ambulance soon arrived, but it was too late. The doctor had only pronounced her dead. "Nobody leaves the building," the tall policeman ordered. "Everyone stay in the main hall until the circumstances are clarified." A middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes and short-cropped hair appeared in the doorway. She glanced around the crime scene, then turned to the officer. "Detective Zora Addison," she introduced herself. "What do we have here?" "Female, approximately 25 years old, allegedly strangled," the officer reported. "Found by a hotel employee around 11:30, presumed dead no more than an hour ago." Zora nodded and walked over to the body, sitting down beside it. Her gaze slid over the victim's face, then the marks on her neck, finally stopping at the broken nail and scratches on her wrists. She fought back. The detective said thoughtfully, "Who is she?" "Melina Freeman, an employee of Everhill Investments who is holding a corporate party here," the officer replied. "Husband? Present at the party. Louis Freeman, 31, works for the same company." Zora stood up, glancing around the hallway. "Isolate him in a separate room," she ordered, "and get me a list of all the guests. It's going to be a long night." Detective Zora Addison scrutinized the living room of the second-floor suite at the Northern Lights Hotel, which had been temporarily turned into an impromptu investigative headquarters. On the wall hung a whiteboard, where the crime scene photos, a schematic of the hotel, and a list of the corporate party guests had already appeared. In the center was a photograph of Melina Freeman, taken a few hours before her death. A bright red dress, a confident smile, a lively look. The clock showed 3 o'clock in the morning, but none of those present at the party were allowed to leave the hotel. Most of the guests remained in the banquet hall under police supervision. Some were allowed to rest in their rooms, but forbidden to go out or socialize with each other. "What do we have so far?" Zora asked a young officer who was sorting through witness statements. "Time of death between 10:30 and 11:15, he replied, checking his notes. "Preliminary cause is asphyxiation by strangulation. There are finger marks on the victim's neck and skin marks under the fingernails, probably from the attacker. We're waiting on forensics." Zora nodded, walking over to the board. Was she last seen alive? 10:20, when she was talking to her husband outside the conference room on the 3rd floor. That's confirmed by 2 guests who passed by. And the husband? Louis Freeman claims that after the argument in the conference room, he took the elevator downstairs and joined the party. Says he never saw his wife again. Zora tapped her finger thoughtfully on Melina's picture. Time to talk to him. Louis Freeman was placed in a small office in the hotel's reception area. He sat motionless, staring at one point. Dark circles under his eyes and a crumpled shirt betrayed his condition. "Mr. Freeman," Zora sat down across from him, placing a file folder on the desk. "I'm Detective Zora Addison. I'm very sorry for your loss." Louis raised a blank stare at her. "You don't believe that?" His voice sounded hoarse. "You think I killed Melina?" "I don't think anything yet," Zora replied calmly. "I'm gathering facts. Tell me about your conversation with your wife before she died." Louis took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I overheard her talking to her friend Catherine. Melina confessed that she'd been cheating on me with some guy named Jay, and that she had," he stammered, "she had HIV, which she knew about but kept from me." "And how did you react?" "I was shocked. Angry, of course. We went up to the conference room to talk privately. She confirmed everything there, said she was going to file for divorce after the holidays." "Was there physical contact between the two of you?" Zora watched his reaction carefully. Luis lowered his eyes. "I grabbed her by the shoulders. Harder than you should have. I was angry, but—" He looked up. "I didn't kill her. I swear. I let her go and told her to get out. She left, and I stayed in the conference room." "How long were you in there?" "I don't know exactly, maybe 20 minutes. Then I took the elevator back to the party." "Did anyone see you during that time?" "I'm not sure. There was no one in the elevator, and when I got back to the lounge, I stayed out of sight." Zora made a note in her notebook. "Your friend Douglas Pierce says he was with you from 10:30 until the body was found. Is that correct?" Louis frowned. "No, I mean he came up to me when I got back to the hall, gave me some water, but we weren't together the whole time." "I see." Zora made another note. "Are you aware of any other men your wife may have been seeing besides this Jay?" "No." Louis shook his head. "But from what I've learned today, it could have been many. She flirted with everyone. And that made you angry?" "Of course it did," he said, bitterness in his voice. What husband likes to see his wife flirting with others in front of him? Angry enough to kill her? Louis raised his head sharply. "I didn't kill Melina," he said clearly. "I was angry, yes, but I wasn't that out of control." Zora studied his face for a while, then nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Freeman. Stay at the hotel for now. I may have further questions." After leaving the room, Zora headed for the banquet hall, where her assistants continued to interview witnesses. Next on her list was Douglas Pierce. A tall man with a neat beard was nervously rubbing his tie, waiting for his turn. When he saw Zora, he straightened up. "Mr. Pierce," Zora pointed to an empty table in the corner of the room. "Shall we talk?" Douglas nodded, following her. "You're a close friend of Louis Freeman's, aren't you?" Zora began as they sat down. "Yes, we've been working together for 5 years. I consider him my best friend." "And you claim to have been with him at the time of the murder?" Douglas nodded confidently. "Yes, from about 10:30 or so. He looked upset when he came back into the hall. I gave him some water and we stood against the wall talking about the job." "It's weird," Zora said thoughtfully, "because that's not what Louis says. He claims you came up to him briefly, but he was alone most of the time." Douglas blinked, his confidence shaken. "He must not remember well because of the shock. We were definitely together." "And what exactly did you talk about?" "Oh, an upcoming project, the quarterly report." "In the middle of a party? After Louis had a fight with his wife?" Douglas swallowed nervously. He didn't want to discuss the personal. Work had always been a way for him to distract himself. Zora changed tactics. "What can you say about Louis and Melina's marriage?" Douglas paused as if searching for words. They were different people. Louis was serious, responsible. Melina liked fun, attention. Lately, there had been obvious tension between them. Was Melina cheating on her husband? "I can't say that," Douglas answered quickly. "But let's just say she was not averse to flirting. With you, too." Douglas jerked as if struck by a blow. "What? No, never. I respected their marriage." "But were there other men in the company with whom she flirted?" "Almost all of them." Douglas grinned bitterly. "Especially the new project manager, Benjamin. They often stayed up late, working on presentations." Zora made a note. "And enemies? Did Mullen have conflicts with anyone in the company?" Douglas hesitated for a moment. There had been one situation with Tamara in accounting. Melina had allegedly accidentally spilled coffee on her new dress before an important meeting, and she was also constantly arguing with Jason in IT. He refused to give her priority access to any systems. Zora spent the next 2 hours interviewing the other guests, gradually putting together a picture of the evening and of Melina Freeman's life. By 6 in the morning, she had over 20 witness statements, and the image of the victim was becoming more and more contradictory. Beautiful, ambitious, outgoing. That's what many people said about her. But the words calculating, manipulative, ruthless were also heard. Melina knew how to charm the right people and ruthlessly discard those who were no longer useful to her. In her 2 years with the company, she had advanced from an entry-level position to deputy head of marketing, stepping over several of her more experienced colleagues. "Detective Addison," an officer knocked on the door. The preliminary results of the medical exam came in. Zora took the folder outstretched, quickly reviewing the contents. "The time of death has been clarified. Between 10:45 and 11:15, cause, strangulation. The attacker was face-to-face with the victim. Under Melina's fingernails, traces of skin were found. Samples for DNA analysis were taken. And one more thing. The tests confirmed the presence of HIV. "Mr. Freeman agreed to take the test?" Zora asked. "Yes, right after the interrogation. The preliminary test is positive, but we have to wait for confirmation." Zora frowned. If Louis had recently learned that his wife had infected him with a deadly virus, that was the strongest motive for murder. But something about this story wasn't adding up. "I need the security tapes," she ordered. "Everything in the hotel from tonight." Half an hour later, Zora was reviewing the security tapes. The hotel was old, and the CCTV only covered the main entrances, lobby, and corridors, leaving many blind spots. On one of the tapes, she saw Louis and Melina climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor at 10:20. At 10:43, Louis was alone taking the elevator down, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He stepped out into the lobby, and headed toward the banquet room. At 10:50, a figure in red flashed on the other camera. Melina was coming down the service stairs. She looked around as if she was afraid of being followed. That was the end of the footage of her. The service corridor where the body had been found was not covered by cameras. Zora rewound the lobby footage and saw something interesting. At 10:45, Douglas Pierce crossed the lobby at a brisk pace and headed for the stairs leading to the upper floors. He returned at 11:05, adjusting his tie and looking around. His claim that he had been with Lewis since 10:30 was clearly a lie. "Detective," a young officer peered into the room. "Catherine Morris wants to talk to you. She says it's urgent." Catherine waited in the small break room. Her eyes were red with tears, her hands nervously rubbing her napkin. "Miss Morris," Zora sat down across from her. "You wanted to see me?" "I have something to tell you," Catherine said quietly. "About Mullen." "I'm listening." Catherine took a deep breath. "We were close friends. She trusted me with many secrets. I knew about her diagnosis. I knew about her cheating. And about Jay?" "Yes," Catherine nodded. "She met him at a conference in Vancouver 3 months ago. It turned into a serious relationship. She was going to leave Luis after the new year." "Why not before?" "Because of the bonus," Catherine lowered her eyes. "The annual bonuses are paid in January. She wanted the money before she left." "Calculating," Zora said. "That was Melina," Catherine smiled sadly. "Always thinking a few steps ahead. What happened last night? Louis claims to have overheard you and Melina talking." Catherine swallowed nervously. "Yes. We were talking in the lobby. Melina was talking about her plans with Jay. Then Louis showed up and I left. I never saw her again." "Did you know she didn't tell her husband about her diagnosis?" "I convinced her to tell him." Catherine sounded sincere. "It was irresponsible of her. But she was afraid of his reaction." "Is he hot-tempered?" "No, quite the opposite. Louis is always calm, reserved. But Melina said it was deceptive, that he's emotional inside, just hides it well." Zora scrutinized Catherine's face. Something in her story didn't add up. "You said you were close friends, but yesterday Melina was wearing a red dress and you were wearing red too. It was an odd coincidence for close friends to come to a party wearing the same colors." Catherine tensed. It's an accident. We didn't discuss what we were wearing." "Where did you go after you left Melina with Louis?" "Back to the party," Catherine answered quickly. "I drank champagne with my colleagues from the Human Resources Department." "The rest of the evening?" "Yes," she averted her gaze. "I mean, I went to the ladies' room briefly. For about 10 minutes. "At what time?" "I don't remember exactly. Maybe around 11? Zora made a note in her notebook. "One more question. Did you ever see Melina with Douglas Pierce, alone?" Catherine flinched, her eyes widening. "No, of course not. Douglas is Louis's best friend. He would never—" "But?" Catherine hesitated. "It's just that, sometimes I felt like Douglas was watching Melina too closely. Not as a friend of her husband's, but as a—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Like a jealous lover?" Zora suggested. "I don't want to accuse anyone," Catherine said hastily. "It's just my impression." After talking to Catherine, Zora returned to the makeshift headquarters. On the board was now a diagram with a timeline of events and pictures of the main players. Red threads marked their movements during the critical period from 10:30 to 11:15. Luis quarrels with Melina in the conference room until 10:43, then takes the elevator down and returns to the party. He is seen by several guests, though no one can confirm his whereabouts at all times. Melina stays in the conference room for a while after Luis leaves, then takes the elevator down the service stairs at 10:50. What happens next and why she chooses this path is unknown. Douglas, contrary to his testimony, leaves the banquet room at 10:45 and does not return until 11:05, just before the body is discovered. Catherine claims to have been at the party, but admits that she was away around the time of the murder. "Something doesn't add up," Zora muttered, studying the diagram. Luis had a motive to kill his wife after learning of her infidelity and diagnosis. But the cameras show that he came down before Melina left the conference room. Could he have somehow returned undetected? She shifted her gaze to Douglas's photograph. What if Douglas isn't just covering for a friend? What if he himself was involved in the murder? Zora remembered Catherine's words about the way Douglas had looked at Melina. What if it wasn't a crush, but hatred? What if he found out about Melina's diagnosis and decided to protect his friend? Or what if there was a history between Douglas and Melina, or maybe Catherine, who saw Melina last before Luis, knows more than she's saying? Her testimony was too smooth, too thoughtful. Zora returned to the camera footage, scrutinizing every movement of the figures. Here was Douglas going up the stairs, but the camera didn't show which floor he stopped on. Here's Melina coming down the service staircase, looking around as if afraid of being followed. And here's Catherine at 10:55, crossing the lobby at a brisk pace, heading for the restrooms. Her red dress is almost identical to Melina's. Zora stopped the tape, zooming in on the image. There was something dark on the sleeve of Catherine's dress. A stain? Blood? "Officer Johnson," Zora called out. "See if Miss Morris kept last night's dress. If she did, seize it as possible evidence." Something told Zora there were more people involved in this case than she'd originally thought. Not just a jealous husband killing a cheating wife. There was a conspiracy here, a carefully planned deception. She looked at the picture board again. Louis, learning the terrible truth about his wife. Douglas, who had mysteriously disappeared at the critical moment. Catherine, whose testimony is full of contradictions. Which of them is lying? Who killed Melina Freeman? And most importantly, why? The morning sun was barely breaking through the heavy snow clouds when Detective Zora Addison parked the squad car at the Freeman home. Her eyes were red after a sleepless night, but her mind remained clear. She knew the clue lay in the details, in the little things that were easy to miss. The police officers were already finishing their search, standard procedure in a murder investigation. The house was neat, almost sterile. No unnecessary items, just functional furniture and a minimum of decor. Typical home of the meticulous financial analyst that Louis Freeman was. "Anything interesting?" Zora asked the officer in charge of the search. "Nothing obvious," he shrugged. The husband's office was in perfect order. In the bedroom they found separate sets of bed linens. It looked like they slept apart. In the bathroom, 2 different toothbrushes at opposite ends of the shelf. The marriage was clearly not in good shape, Zora nodded. And the victim's personal effects? In the dressing room. Lots of expensive clothes, jewelry, and this. The officer handed her a small box. Found it under a stack of sweaters. The box was dainty, with mother-of-pearl inlays. Inside was a leather-bound notebook and several flashcards. "A diary?" Zora took the notebook carefully. "Looks like it. The last entries were dated the day before yesterday." Zora opened the last page and began to read. Melina's handwriting was sprawling, emotional, with heavy pressure. "He's starting to suspect something. Yesterday he asked why I got home from work so late. I had to lie about an urgent project. I don't think he believed Jay says we need to accelerate our plans, but I can't leave until I get my annual bonus and now this damn diagnosis. The doctor says you can live with the meds, but who wants a woman with HIV?" Jay stopped answering the phone when I told him. "And Douglas is a coward. He was the only one who stood by me, even though we agreed we'd never see each other again. Too dangerous, too close to Louis. But he promised to help if Louis found out the truth. Tomorrow is corporate, then Christmas vacation. Perfect time to wrap things up." Zora flipped back a few pages. The entries were becoming more and more explicit. Melina detailed her encounters with lovers, first with co-workers from the office, then with Jay from Vancouver. But it was Douglas Pierce who took up the most space in the diary. "I never thought my husband's best friend would turn out to be such a passionate lover. It started as a game, a way to get back at Louis for his eternal coldness. But now I can't stop. Douglas is obsessed with me. He says he's always wanted me, from day one. Sometimes I think he hates Louis because I chose him." An entry dated September 14th contained a shocking confession. "Told Douglas today about the diagnosis. I thought he would be furious, accuse me of being irresponsible. But he remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. He said it didn't change anything, that we were now bound forever. His reaction scares me more than the diagnosis itself." Zora slammed the journal shut and slipped it into her jacket pocket. A picture was beginning to emerge. Douglas wasn't just lying to protect his friend. He himself was involved much deeper than he'd originally thought. "Bag the box and the flashcards as evidence," she ordered. And find me Douglas Pierce, immediately." An hour later, Douglas Pierce was sitting across from Zora in the interrogation room of the police station. His self-confidence had evaporated and his face was anxious. "Mr. Pierce," Zora placed the Molina diary on the table. "Are you familiar with this?" Douglas glanced at the notebook and quickly averted his eyes. "No, what is it?" "Melina Freeman's diary. A very candid diary." Zora opened it to a laid-in page. "It details your relationship and what you knew about her diagnosis." Douglas turned pale, his hands trembling. "It's not true," he whispered. "She made it all up." "Come on, Douglas," Zora stepped forward. "The cameras show you went upstairs right after Lewis. You were there when they were fighting. You heard Melina confess to her husband that she'd been unfaithful and sick." "I didn't kill her," Douglas's voice trembled. "I swear I didn't want her to die." "But you lied about your whereabouts, lied about being with Lewis. Why?" Douglas covered his face with his hands. "I was trying to protect him. When I got upstairs, they were already fighting. I heard yelling from the conference room. I heard her confess to cheating, to being sick. Then Lewis came out. He was out of his mind. I hid around the corner. He didn't see me. And then? I went into the conference room. Melina was there, crying. She said it was over, that Lewis knew the truth now." "The truth about you two?" Douglas shook his head slowly. "No. She didn't have time to tell him about me. Only about Jay from Vancouver and the diagnosis." "And what happened next?" "We had a fight." Douglas looked down at the table, avoiding Zora's gaze. "I said that she ruined my best friend's life, that she was selfish, thinking only of herself. She laughed in my face, told me I wasn't any better myself, that she used me to get back at Lewis. And that made you angry?" "No, I mean, yes, I was angry, but not so angry that—" he stammered. "To strangle her?" Zora finished for him. "They found skin particles under Melina's fingernails. When the DNA test results come back, we'll know if it's your skin, Douglas." Douglas looked up at her with a stricken look. "I didn't kill her," he repeated. "Yes, we had a fight. Yes, I grabbed her by the shoulders, shook her. But when I left, she was alive. She said she'd come down the other way so she wouldn't run into Luis." "Down the service ladder?" "Yes," Douglas nodded. "She used it a lot during our meetings." Zora scrutinized Douglas's face. His statement sounded sincere, but something still didn't add up. "What did you do after the fight with Melina?" "Walking around the hotel," Douglas shrugged. "Thinking, trying to decide what to do next. I was shocked by everything I'd learned." "And what time did you get back to the banquet room?" "About 11:05. I saw Luis against the wall, gave him some water." Zora made a note in her notebook. Douglas's statement matched the surveillance footage. If he was telling the truth, and Melina had come down the chain of command after their altercation, then the murder had to have happened in a narrow time frame. "Detective, we have new information." An officer peeked into the interview room and handed Zora a folder. Zora quickly looked through the contents. The technicians had found another surveillance camera in the hotel lobby that wasn't connected to the main system. It showed what had previously remained hidden. At 10:55, Louis Freeman was climbing the service stairs, the same stairs that Douglas had said Melina was supposed to descend. Zora looked up at Douglas. "You're free to go. For now, but don't leave town." Douglas walked out of the interrogation room, still pale and confused. Zora immediately ordered that Catherine Morris be found and brought in. Catherine was found in her apartment. She was packing her suitcase as if about to leave in a hurry. She looked nervous under questioning, constantly tugging at the sleeve of her blouse. "Miss Morris," Zora began, "where were you last night between 10:30 and 11:15? "I've already told you." Catherine avoided a direct look. "At a party. Went to the ladies' room for a while. The cameras show that you left the banquet hall at 10:40 and didn't return until 11:10. "Where have you been all this time?" Catherine swallowed. I was outside smoking. I needed to think." "In the snow? With no outerwear?" Zora remarked skeptically. "Try again, and this time the truth." Catherine was silent, her eyes filled with tears. "I saw him," she whispered at last. "I saw Louis. Where and when?" "In the service corridor, about 11 o'clock. He was coming out of there, and his hands—" She hesitated. There was blood on his hands. He was wiping it off with a handkerchief. "And you didn't tell anyone?" "I was frightened," Catherine exclaimed. He saw me and looked at me with that look in his eyes, as if he was warning me that if I talked, I'd be next. "Why were you packing your suitcase when we came in?" "I was afraid he'd find out I'd seen him. I wanted to go to my sister's in Toronto." Zora leaned back in her chair, thinking about what she had heard. Catherine's testimony changed the whole picture of the incident. If Luis had actually gone up the service stairs after taking the elevator, if he had been seen leaving the hallway where the body had been found. "Officer," Zora called out, "bring Louis Freeman in for questioning, now." Half an hour later, Louis was sitting across from Zora in the same interrogation room. His face expressed weariness and humility, but his eyes remained wary. "Mr. Freeman," Zora placed the surveillance printouts in front of him. "You said that after the fight with your wife, you took the elevator down and never left the banquet hall. But this footage shows you taking the elevator at 10:45. Would you like to explain this discrepancy?" Louis stared at the photographs for a long time, then slowly looked up. "I wanted to talk to her again," he said quietly. "I was shocked, angry, but we needed to talk about what to do next, with the diagnosis, with our marriage. And that's why you took the service stairs instead of the elevator?" "I didn't want to be seen together," he rubbed his temples. "After the scene in the conference room, it would have been awkward." "Did you find her?" Louis tensed up. "No. I went upstairs, but she wasn't there. I figured she'd already come down, so I went back to the party." "That's odd," Zora said thoughtfully, "because Catherine Morris claims to have seen you leaving the service corridor around 11 o'clock. "There was blood on your hands," she said. Louis's face froze. "She's lying," he said after a pause. "I wasn't in that corridor, and there was no blood on my hands." "How do you explain that?" Zora placed another photograph in front of him. It showed Louis standing against the wall in the banquet hall. There was a small red stain on the cuff of his white shirt. "Yeah, I don't know." His voice shook. "Maybe wine? I could have spilled champagne on myself." "Our technicians checked your shirt, Mr. Freeman. It's not wine, it's blood, and it matches your wife's blood type." Louis was silent, his face pale. "There were skin particles under Melina's fingernails," Zora continued. "We matched them to the samples you gave us when you were tested. It's a match, Mr. Freeman. It's your skin. I told you before, I grabbed her by the shoulders during the fight," Louis said quietly. "She might have scratched me then." "Maybe," Zora nodded. "But there's something else. The medics put the time of death at between 10:45 and 11:15. And then you were seen leaving the hallway where your wife's body was later found." Louis closed his eyes, his shoulders slumped. "I didn't mean it," he whispered so quietly that Zora barely heard him. "I didn't plan to kill her." Zora remained silent, giving him a chance to continue. "When I came downstairs after the fight, I couldn't think about anything else," Louis said slowly. "All I could think about was that she knew about her diagnosis and still put me at risk anyway. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an attempt on my life." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I went up the chain of command because I knew she often went that way. I wanted to intercept her, make her explain herself, and I met her there in the hallway. She was coming down and we came face to face." "What happened next?" She laughed in my face. The bitterness in Louis's voice was almost palpable. Said I deserved it, that she'd never loved me, that she'd used me to get ahead in her career, that she'd been unfaithful since the beginning of our marriage, with dozens of men, and with Douglas too. Louis clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I lost control, grabbed her by the throat, just wanted her to stop talking. And then I saw the fear in her eyes, and it gave me strength. I squeezed and squeezed until she wouldn't fight back. And then I realized what I'd done. Louis stared into the void in front of him. I let her go, and she fell to the floor. I tried to feel for a pulse, but there was none. I killed her. I killed my wife. Did you try to cover your tracks? No. Yeah, I don't know. He shook his head. I wiped my hands with a handkerchief, threw it in the trash can in the bathroom, went back to the party, tried to act normal. Thought she'd be found later, maybe in the morning. Didn't expect it to happen so soon. Zora closed the file folder and looked at Lewis with a long look. Louis Freeman, you are under arrest for the murder of Melina Freeman. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Luis listened to the standard notice of rights with a detached look. When the officer handcuffed him, he didn't resist. I got a double sentence, didn't I? He said quietly, rising. HIV in prison. Maybe that's even better. Mr. Freeman, Zora stopped him at the door. The medical report came in this morning. Your HIV test. It was a false positive. A more accurate test showed that you were healthy. Louis froze, his face contorted with shock and grief. Then why did she say... He couldn't finish the question. Maybe she didn't know for sure, Zora answered. Or maybe she wanted to hurt you. We'll never know for sure. When Luis was taken away, Zora was alone in the interrogation room. She stared at the crime scene photos, at the picture of a smiling Melina, at the diary entry about her many lovers. A life of lies and manipulation, cut short so suddenly. Douglas Pierce was waiting in the hallway when Zora left the room. Is it true? He asked. Lewis confessed? Yes, Zora nodded. He met her in the service corridor and killed her in a fit of rage. She told him about me? The fear in Douglas's eyes was clear. Yes, Zora nodded again. In the last moments of her life, she confessed everything. About all her lovers, including you. Douglas lowered his head. I should have known she would, he muttered. She'd never been good at keeping secrets, especially if revealing them would hurt. You're free to go, Mr. Pierce, Zora said. But I suggest you think about your priorities in life. Later, sitting in her office, Zora was reviewing the final report on the Melina Freeman case, a classic crime of passion provoked by lies and betrayal. Louis Freeman had pleaded guilty and would probably get a reduced sentence because of the circumstances of the crime. However, his life will never be the same again. Douglas Pierce quit his job the next day and was rumored to be planning to move to another city. Catherine Morris was on the case as a witness. Her testimony helped expose the killer. Zora closed the case file, another story that started with love and ended in tragedy. The snow was still falling in Whitehorse, covering the town in a white blanket, as if trying to hide all the dark secrets beneath its clean surface. But some spots even the heaviest snowfall would not hide. Ah,